that Hamas is worse than ISIS. Today, the Israeli Defense Forces put out a video showing footage of Hamas fighters who attacked Israeli citizens on Saturday carrying ISIS flags. Now, why should the world put up with such a nebulous terrorist organization? A terrorist ideology, a violent ideology, which basically wants to take the world back to the 7th century, calls for the destruction of all non-Muslims and the establishment of a caliphate. And the counter question to Israel is, yes, you can cut Hamas off its knees, you can militarily ensure that they are annihilated, but what about the political ideology that has spawned them? What is the idea that replaces that? Because you cannot kill an idea with military action. You can only kill an idea with another one. Both those questions we'll put to our guests, but first, the story so far.
के रास्ते से है, बॉर्डर के एरिया से पूरी सड़क पे तांडव मचा दिया था हमास के लड़ाकों ने.
You can hear military helicopters buzzing overhead. There is intermittent sound of bombs and rockets going off. And this is where one of the rockets fell. This is what remains of a car.
The terrorists got the clinic was attacked for hours, but this is the time, the second that the terrorists came inside and started butchering people. They shot her between the legs. She's telling us that, and she's telling me they are on top of me.
He kept telling that during the whole time the terrorist was laughing.
They were laughing.
They were and making jokes between them.
In this moment, you must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel.
You may be strong enough on your own to defend yourself, but as long as America exists, you will never ever have to. We will always be there by your side.
I was here predominantly to show solidarity to the Israeli people, to provide support to the Israeli government.
Now, here's why this ISIS-Hamas nexus, alleged by the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli government, why is this important? Because this is no longer then just a problem between Israel and Hamas or Israel and the Palestinians. This is about an anti-Israel agenda which ISIS holds. It calls for the destruction of Israel as a central ideological goal. ISIS propaganda is motivated by the cause to liberate Palestine. Now, liberation of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is in Jerusalem, which is of course disputed between the Jews and the Muslims, that is also one of the key objectives of ISIS. ISIS propaganda focuses on a Jewish-Christian plot against Islam. This is no longer about two sets of people and their rights to self-government or land. This is about a civilizational clash, as has been outlined by the ISIS ideology. ISIS calls on all Muslims, wherever you are. You can be in a far-flung corner of the world. You could be in Australia or Indonesia, but it calls on all Muslims to attack Jewish communities around the world. In fact, the Sinai branch of ISIS promotes itself as the conqueror of Jerusalem. Active ISIS radicalization operations have been unearthed in Israel. Over 80 ISIS-linked prisoners are currently in Israeli jails. Now, one of the fundamental demands of the terrorists who carried out those attacks on Saturday was the release of prisoners. We don't know how many of them are fighting for the Palestinian cause and how many of them have diffused into ISIS, which is essentially this absolutely nebulous, violent 7th century ideology, which, like I said, calls for the extermination of all Israeli Jews. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu had tweeted, and in fact, the very first speech that he made after the attacks, he said, Hamas is worse than ISIS. Let's recap how Israel too, and today the Israeli Defense Forces put out that video from Saturday, which showed Hamas fighters carrying the ISIS flags. Let's put out a bunch of sound bites from Israeli leaders as to how they have framed this fight. This is not just a fight for a political question or the lack of addressing a political question. This is a fight against a violent nihilist ideology. That's the framing.
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way. The savage attacks that Hamas perpetrated against innocent Israelis are mind-boggling, kidnapping scores of women, children, and elderly, even Holocaust survivors. But though Israel didn't start this war, Israel will finish it.
Joe, I want to give you a clear picture of the difficult situation we face. We were struck Saturday by an attack whose savagery I can say we have not seen since the Holocaust. I mean, we had hundreds massacred, families wiped out in their beds in their homes, women brutally raped and murdered. We've never seen such savagery in the history of the state. And they're even worse than ISIS. They're even worse than ISIS, and we need to treat them as such.
They're even worse than ISIS, and we need to treat them as such. Now, meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel. He's on a mission to assure all possible American support to the Israeli government, as well as to prevent a larger war from erupting in the wider Middle East. The U.S. has deployed military support to Israel, including rebooting the Iron Dome, as well as artillery support. The U.S. has also mobilized its biggest aircraft carrier, in fact, the biggest in the world, the USS Gerald Ford, to provide military support and also to send out a warning to Iran, do not get involved. Meanwhile, UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly is also in Israel to reiterate Israel's right to defend itself and Britain's support to Israel in doing that.
So in this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel.
You may be strong enough on your own to defend yourself, but as long as America exists, you will never ever have to. We will always be there by your side.
I was here predominantly to show solidarity to the Israeli people, to provide support to the Israeli government.
All right, let me open this up to our guests who are joining us, a full panel joining us this evening on Brass Tacks. Professor Max Abrams is a global security expert, is the author of books on terrorist dynamics. Charlotte Littlewood is the former head of the UK-India desk at ICFS. She's joining us from London. Michael Dixon is a British-Israeli writer, joining us from Ra'anana in Israel. D.P. Srivastava is former Indian ambassador to the Islamic Republic of Iran and a distinguished fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation. And Herb Keenan is an Israeli columnist who's joining us. Let me start with Mr. Dixon because, extraordinary events on Saturday and then the Israeli response to it. We're 6 days out since that began. Please help our viewers understand, yes, Israel's military objective is to go into Gaza. They've called in something like 300,000 reservists. There's going to be a massive ground operation to basically cut Hamas off its knees. How easy or difficult and how long will this operation last? And what may be the collateral damage as a result of that?
Well, of course, we have the possibility of a long and protracted campaign. And as you said in your introduction and you showed the pictures, this has been called Israel's 9/11, and the result of it must be the downfall of Hamas. So the IDF and Israel has demonstrated that because Hamas have declared war on Israel, they will spare no effort in making sure they absolutely dismantle these terrorists. And they must do that because we will never allow an attack like this to happen again. And not just that, Hamas's dismantlement is important for the entire world because other terrorist organizations are looking at this now and thinking, can they get away with it? Israel's commitment is firm. They will not get away with this, and they will send a message to anybody who would massacre innocents, who would take babies from their cribs and behead them, who would rape women and pillage villages and towns, and then take children as their kidnappees in Gaza. We will not allow that, and that's why this campaign must take as long as it takes for the utter dismantlement of Hamas.
If Max Abrams is there, Max Abrams, the discovery that these Hamas, all right, let me put that to Charlotte Littlewood. The discovery that these Hamas terrorists were carrying ISIS flags, that makes it a battle between the civilized world and everything that the civilized world stands for and this 7th century violent, nihilistic ideology. It's not just a problem between two sets of peoples and their rights to land or rights to self-government or the history therein. This is about the civilized world's answer to a group of people who believe in taking all of us back to the 7th century.
There are quite a few different things happening here at once. And so in part, absolutely what you're saying is correct. But also there is an ongoing issue around the Palestine-Israel conflict. But what you're saying here is absolutely correct. And it's that's something that Hamas has always believed in and has always advocated. In 2019, the statements were for people to kill Jews essentially where they find them, find Jews and kill them. That's always been the thinking of Hamas. And there's a very problematic hadith that's been interpreted in a very extreme way about the end days, in which Jews will hide behind rocks and trees and rocks will turn around and say to the Muslims, here is the Jew, kill him. And this has been used as a bedrock for a lot of extreme Islamist groups. Iran sees the eradication of Jews from the world as the beginning of the end days. And there have been comments from some in the regime who have said it's useful that they're all in Israel. So this is not a surprise that there's an ISIS flag, and in fact, it's all the same ideology. But that doesn't mean to say there isn't also an issue of Palestinians living in awful conditions, and I think that there needs to be changes there too, and there needs to be a way in which we can move forward from that. But that is almost separate to what we see with this terrorist ideology.
All right, let me go to DP Srivastav and ask him this as well. Because, like I said, the fact that ISIS flags were found there, and I want to underline this, this is what the IDF is claiming, this is what Netanyahu is claiming, independent verification, whether it is for CNN News 18 or any other independent media outlet, we are not in a position to independently verify this. So I'm going to add that caveat. But going by what has been said by the IDF and what has been said by Mr. Netanyahu, that ISIS flags were discovered, then it's not just an Israel-Palestine problem. This is a civilized world versus uncivilized barbarians problem. And yes, one part of that problem is, to violently respond to them, because I guess they only understand the language of violence. But more importantly, beyond that, it is also a problem of ideology and ideas. And I said this at the top of the show, you cannot kill an idea with just military force. An idea has to be killed with a better idea. DP Srivastav.
Thank you for having me. I cannot comment on something which, as you mentioned, has not yet been proven. There are some indications that ISIS flags have been found. But let me begin by saying that this act of terrorism has to be condemned very strongly. Our Prime Minister has already done so. There cannot be any justification for terrorist violence against unarmed combatants, women and children. Second, I might add that in order to ensure that this conflict does not escalate further, first thing should be unconditional release of the women and children or other civilians who have been taken hostage by Hamas. And this step is important so that to ensure that this conflict does not spread. I may also add that, as you mentioned earlier, that there are competing ideas. And I think if the world has to show that there's a way forward, we have to show that there are other ideas on the table for a political solution of this problem. And that includes two-state solution. But that will have to wait. The first step, as I mentioned, should be unconditional release of women and children who have been taken hostage by Hamas.
Okay, let me go across to the wall there. Let me ask Herb Keenan this. He's joining us from Israel. He's also a columnist with the Jerusalem Post. Yes, like I said, everybody knows what the immediate military objective is, Mr. Keenan. But more importantly, all right, Israel goes in, it cuts Hamas off its knees. Hamas is never in a position to attack Israeli citizens ever again. But what about the political vacuum that will be left behind? What about the political ideology that has spawned Hamas in the first place? How is Israel going to counter that?
Look, the political ideology that spawned Hamas is kind of a simple one, and that is that Israel doesn't have a right to exist. Hamas didn't attack because there's a political vacuum. Hamas attacked because Israel is here, and they don't want Israel to be here. And I think that's clear from what we saw on Saturday. Right? You don't murder, you don't behead babies and rape and murder women because you've got a political problem. You do that because that's part of a genocidal ideology. And I think what's happened in Israel is that has been internalized now by the population. And the Israeli population, who's going to live here and wants to live here, is not going to tolerate a situation where you have those folks right on your border. So I think to say that, this is some kind of political problem, and if Israel would have just done X, Y, or Z, it wouldn't have happened, I think that's very much wishful thinking.
But can I ask you, and one of the reasons I'm asking you this is because today, I'm sure you've seen this, the IDF has claimed that they have footage and they've seen footage, they've released some of it as well, of Hamas terrorists who attacked Israel on Saturday with ISIS flags. And we were led to believe that ISIS was finished, that by 2020, 2021, ISIS was over in Syria and in Iraq. At least militarily, at least in a position where they could launch violent attacks, it had been annihilated. That body had been annihilated with the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. But if this is indeed true, that Hamas fighters were waving ISIS flags and they believe in ISIS ideology, then ISIS still has relevance in the Middle East, and it's a concern of the entire civilized world to respond to that by military means and through also political means, because I keep saying this, you cannot counter an ideology just with guns and aircraft carriers and strikes. You need to counter it with a counter ideology, a better idea, which more people will believe in, and not an ideology that violently wants to take us back to the 7th century.
Look, I think what's worrying for us is what we saw on Saturday. And it doesn't matter if it's Hamas or it's ISIS, the ideology is not that different, right? What matters for us is how you could prevent that from happening again. And I think what happened on Saturday is that Israel had a failure of imagination, meaning that Israel could not imagine that an army of terrorists would pour across the border and start slaughtering civilians. And now it's had a wake-up call, and that's that, well, this could happen. So all the energy right now is going to be in trying to ensure that something like that can never happen again, not in the South or in the North, right? The branding of the organization, or do they belong to this murderer or that murderer, that's secondary.
Okay.
Right? The thing is, how do you eradicate this from your border? So that's the focus right now.
Let me ask Max Abrams, again, I want to take this story forward because a lot is contingent. What's going to happen in the next few weeks in Gaza and Israel's counteroffensive is contingent on whether this can be contained to an operation within that area between Israel and Hamas, or will this spread to wider areas? Last night there was this whole scare that Hezbollah fighters had launched some kind of strikes from the northern side of Israel, from southern Lebanon. There is chatter that Iran could possibly be involved. Neither the Americans nor the Israelis are giving concrete evidence of the involvement of Iran, but there have been multiple conversations. The Iranian leader has spoken to the Saudi Crown Prince. I believe the Iranian foreign minister is going to be in Lebanon, perhaps to send out a message to Hezbollah. But what is the chance that this can be contained as just a limited war, if you will, between Israel and Hamas without it spilling over into the wider Middle East? Because that, of course, would have far greater ramifications than if this operation were to be contained in that limited geography.
Sure. My best bet is that this war will not be contained to Gaza. Israel really had two choices. In the face of the worst terrorist attack against Israel in its entire, livelihood, and one of the worst terrorist attacks in terms of fatalities ever recorded anywhere around the world, Israel could have been very restrained and essentially done nothing, which would have invited more terrorism, or it could take the fight to Hamas in Gaza, which it is doing now. The problem, as everybody knows, is that there are 2.2 million Gazans, and that Hamas intentionally buries itself in the population in order to maximize Palestinian civilian deaths. Hamas literally places its headquarters underneath a major hospital in Gaza. And so Israel inevitably is going to be causing a large amount of civilian pain in Gaza. And Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, is going to use that as a pretext, most likely. I'm just predicting. A lot of people would predict the same thing here, that Nasrallah will open up a second front. We know that there is a very tight relationship, an ongoing daily relationship between Iran and Hezbollah. And this is why Israel is so, on alarm about the salvos coming from the north, because that would be consistent with the way that Nasrallah thinks and has acted historically. I also wouldn't be surprised at all if there's growing discord and political violence and terrorism out of the West Bank. Understandably, we're talking a lot about Gaza because that's where Hamas is based, but Hamas also has a lot of supporters in the West Bank. Furthermore, these groups, whether we're talking about Palestinian Islamic Jihad or the Lion's Den, out of the West Bank, they are interconnected. All of this, of course, could be commingled with some type of an internal intifada of Arab Israelis, not all of them, but a portion of them rising up and also using violence.
Okay.
Iran, so there are many possibilities about how this conflict could spread, and I haven't even exhausted them.
So let me go to Mr. Dixon. Some of these could become a reality. Some of these could be deterred. One of the actions that the U.S. has taken is to move its biggest aircraft strike carrier group, the Gerald Ford. And I think Biden said this in his press conference yesterday. If Iran or any other player in that region wants to take advantage of what's going on, then do not. Would that message resonate in Tehran, or do you see this spilling into a wider conflict? Because if it does, then what is Israel going to do? If it's going to be attacked from the south, an attack from the north, an attack from its east, what does Israel do?
Well, let's be clear. Israel has never lost a war, and it doesn't intend to lose this war. And there's a reason why. Israel loses a war, and there's no more Israel. So Israel is always fighting for its survival. And Israel is taking precautions. It is evacuating some civilians from its northern border. It is making sure to enhance and enforce forces that are on the different borders. But Israel has faced multi-pronged attacks in the past. This is the kind of thing that they do expect. So there is not a failure of imagination in this regard, because Israel does war drills constantly. Israel knows that should its enemies put down their weapons, there will be peace the next day. But if Israel will put down its weapons, there will be no more Israel. So we're always fighting for our survival here in Israel, and it's a battle that we intend to win. Obviously, the strongest possible terms have come from the United States and hopefully other countries as well, to warn other players in the Middle East to stay out of this conflict, and they should do so. But if they decided to come onto the battlefield, Israel is ready, and America has shown they're going to stand foursquare behind them in the fight.
But the point that I think Max Abrams was alluding to, maybe it's not a question that Israel is concerned about, or maybe this question isn't even being asked right now. But surely it'll happen 3 months or 6 months, whenever this ground operation concludes. What takes Hamas's place? I mean, what's the vacuum, and how are you going to fill that vacuum? Because Hamas itself came into existence because of the vacuum that was created after Israel's withdrawal in 2005. and whatever agreements that were there between Fatah and Israel that didn't come to bear. They were not fully implemented. There was a vacuum, and Hamas, exploited that vacuum, and they came in. So, what takes Hamas's place?
You're absolutely right that Hamas.
Mr. Dixon, yeah, thank you.
And was democratically elected, but then in a violent coup overthrew their Fatah brothers in a very violent way and took power, and have since held Gaza under their jackboot. But the truth is that the question of what happens after Hamas is not Israel's concern, because Israel cannot live with Hamas in charge of Gaza. So Israel's calculation here is that anything is better than this ISIS-like organization that is willing to and has the means to, by funding from Iran, slaughter Israeli innocents and Israeli families. So Israel has decided, it's made a strategic decision. If in the past there were more limited attempts to break Hamas's capacity, this time it's all or nothing. It's goodbye to Hamas, and whatever comes next cannot be worse than what we've just seen on the worst carnage that's happened to the Jewish people since the Holocaust.
So, Charlotte Littlewood, so far the biggest support, of course, has come from the United States. They're moving military assets there. They're sending out a signal to other Arab countries, do not get involved. But how much of what happened on Saturday and the response thereof is also because of, the political dysfunction that we've seen over the better part of the last decade or so, in fact, maybe even more. There has been really no attempt at any kind of negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians. Even with Fatah, I don't think there's been any conversation at all. From time to time, particularly Mr. Netanyahu, because of his own political problems, he was stuck in this whole quagmire. There is a feeling that maybe part of that intelligence failure was because institutions were divided and the politics was so bitterly polarizing that people in charge of security kind of overlooked. There was oversight over what happened. Do you see this war sort of bringing the country together and the institutions together in a way that Israel finds its political bearings once again?
I mean, momentarily, the country's being brought together as this is, as we've just heard, the biggest attack on the Jewish community since the Holocaust, and we're seeing anti-Semitism across the globe. It is the most awful actions from citizens in our own countries. In the UK, we've had Nazi iconography shown at protests. We've had "Gas the Jews" shouted in Sydney. I think there's a real bringing together of Jewish people across the world and in Israel. It's not really a time to get into what went wrong, I think, with Israeli governance right now. But absolutely, of course, there will be a time for that. And when that time comes, there will be discussions about the military personnel that were threatening to not turn up, and the mass protests for months on end that distracted Israel and perhaps distracted resources. And that there will be a time for that. I think right now there is unity. There's unity in the face of anti-Semitism that we always knew was there, and now it has been realized in the most atrocious way.
So Herb Keenan, I'm going back to that question I asked one of the panelists earlier. This whole thing hinges on if Israel and its supporters, the Western countries, can contain the fallout of this war, can contain this actual war to that limited geography between Hamas and Israel. Because if it spreads wider, if Hezbollah starts attacking from the north, if Iran starts attacking, if Syria gets involved, and who knows if Egypt, if not in a military way, at least in a non-military way, gets involved in this becomes again an Arab versus Jew kind of a conflict. Is that something that Israel is taking into account? It's factoring in its calculations. How real is that prospect as things stand today?
Look, I think there's a great deal of concern about that. I mean, Israel is very carefully watching what's going in the north, both in southern Lebanon with Hezbollah, with Iran's proxies in Hezbollah, and in Syria, where they've also got proxies there as well. Israel is extremely concerned about that. I think the U.S. move, the posturing there, the moving of that strike force into the Eastern Mediterranean, I think that was a very powerful signal. I mean, Biden, not only did he send the aircraft carrier there, but he also sent it with a message, a very clear message he gave the other night, saying to Iran or to any actors in the region who might want to take advantage of the situation, don't do it. For us in Israel, right, I think that was a very, very reassuring position. But we're still watching it very closely because that's a huge concern, obviously.
I'll give the final word to Mr. Srivastav. At some point, this is a question that India will also have to sort of take a nuanced position on. The Prime Minister, both in the tweet that he put out first and then subsequently after the conversation with Mr. Netanyahu, very, very clear, very unambiguous, unequivocal in condemning the terror and standing with the victims of terror, standing with Israel. But at the same time, today the MEA spokesperson said, as far as the Palestine question is concerned, India's position is something that is known and that is age-old. This whole clash or fight, pulls and pushes between do you go all in and say that this is a terrorist attack, no ifs and buts, you have to condemn it, period, or will the politics force India to once again mean back its position to what it's always been, that while we condemn terrorism and everybody believes in peaceful coexistence, but we also, as far as the Palestinian question is concerned, believe we have to move towards a peaceful two-state solution. I mean, is this a fundamental sort of push and pull that you're going to see more of for India as well as this war continues, as this war drags on?
You know, this is not a binary choice. You need to you have to attempt both. The immediate thing, as I mentioned at the outset, is condemnation of the attack, which Prime Minister Modi and Government of India have done, followed by unconditional release of the hostages, civilians, women and children. But you have to, I think, and these are the next step, which is to address the long-standing issue, which the official spokesman mentioned, of a two-state solution. This is the timing, of course, is something which Israel can choose. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that there is a wider Arab constituency which cannot be ignored, and that sentiment was reflected in the Arab League statements yesterday, and that is they would look for a solution, not an immediate thing, but at least some movement forward. And this is something which has to be addressed at appropriate stage, whichever way Israel likes it to do.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to all our guests for joining us. It has been a fascinating conversation. These have been extraordinary times for the people of Israel. They've not seen anything of this sort in the last 75 years of the existence of that country, where civilians, elderly, women, children have been targeted in this fashion. And now, of course, the counteroffensive is going to be near total. As some of our panelists were saying, they are going to go completely all in a way to ensure that Hamas does not even think of attempting or pulling off something like they've done this past Saturday. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back on the other side, there's cheers and warm welcomes for the Pakistan cricket team. First in Hyderabad, then in Ahmedabad, and that, of course, has sparked a controversy ahead of the India-Pakistan clash on Saturday. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll debate that. It's the eternal question, has been for the last number of years. Should India have invited Pakistan to play here in India in the World Cup? And the counter view that if you don't, you are conflating sport with government policy, you're conflating sport with terrorism, and that is unfair to the cricketers and to cricket fans. Quick break, we'll see you on the other side.
רבה מברך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה יתברך שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
يصدر من رعيم باتجاه قطاع غزة. ها هم جنودنا الذين أثخنوا في عدونا.
Welcome back. Here to the Saturday showdown between India and Pakistan. There is controversy over the cheers surrounding the Pakistan team, both in Hyderabad and, of course, later in Ahmedabad. In Hyderabad, of course, where they played their first few matches during the clash with Sri Lanka, there were cheers of Pakistan Jeetega that was going around the stadium. Meanwhile, in Ahmedabad, the Pakistan team got a warm welcome. There were doles and dance and cheers from the local fans. All of this comes amid frozen ties with Pakistan, a nation that is described as the epicenter of terror. India has been a victim of this terror, Pakistan-sponsored terror, for a number of decades now. The question, though, remains. India is hosting Pakistan as per ICC rules for the World Cup. If India refused to host Pakistan, it would have had to give up points, possibly even costing the Indian team a path to the semi-finals and thereafter. But the question also is all this pomp and show and welcome and holes actually necessary? Should India have invited Pakistan at all? Should cricket be treated different from the diplomatic and political ties, which are clearly not in a good place, which are in the deep freezer since these terrorist attacks have been happening? Ultimately, how do you resolve this situation? All right, let me go across to two guests who are joining me now, one each on either side of this divide. Ayaz Memon is a senior sports journalist. He's in fact going to be covering the India-Pakistan game in Ahmedabad on Saturday. Sushant Sareen is senior fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. Sushant, how do you respond to folks who say that, look, this is a game, this is cricket, the cricketers have nothing to do with the state or with the ISI? You know, why are you conflating the two? That soldiers and sportspersons should not be conflated. And also that if India did not invite Pakistan, India being the host, it would have to forfeit points that could possibly cost the Indian cricket team its place going further in this tournament. What would you say to them?
Look, we had to call the Pakistani cricket team, even if we had to hold our nose and call them and play with them in this particular World Cup, because this is an international tournament. We didn't have a choice, right? So yeah, we'll hold our nose, we'll play with them. Can we show some self-respect and not create the kind of tamasha we saw in the hotel? And have you seen what Pakistani Twitterati, Pakistani fans, some of their intellectuals have been writing that, this is how the Hindus have always invited and treated the victorious Muslims. Have you seen, and who says sports and politics don't mix? Who has told us this? One of the oldest sporting events, marathon, was also political. Let's come down to the recent times. Look at how the West has behaved with Russia, for example. How the West behaved. I'm not even going back to the 1980 Olympics and the 1984 Olympics. Let's talk about now, here and now. How the so-called civilized world operates. Why did we ban South Africa from cricket? We could have continued to play with South Africa even if there was apartheid out there. After all, why do you mix these things? And look at the Pakistanis. Serial offenders when it comes to mixing religion with sports, mixing politics with sports. They consider it, their ministers say that this is the captain, when they lost in Mohali during the World Cup, they said, I'm really sorry to the Muslims of the world, as though these guys represent Muslims of the world. Okay? Their ministers say that this is a victory of Islam over Kufr. Why do you want to play with these people? Please tell me this.
Okay.
What do you get out of
the
it?
idea that sport and politics cannot be mixed or should not be mixed is not something that has many takers. I mean, you know this. Whether it is 80 and 84, the USA boycotting the Moscow Games, and then subsequently the USSR boycotting the Los Angeles Games, and even more recently, I mean, when the Football World Cup happened, the Ukrainian team was cheered on as though the outcome of the war would depend on the status of the football team and its outcomes on the pitch. Now, the point is that if politically ties are fraught between India and Pakistan, and it has been for a number of years, and this whole BCCI halfway here logic does not apply. Oh, we're not calling them for a bilateral, but we're calling them for a multilateral. At the end of the day, it's the Pakistan team. You're inviting them. You're rolling out the red carpet, cheers, and people, shouting "Jeetega" by Pakistan. I mean, come on. That's completely a halfway house argument.
Yeah, I mean, Zaka, look, if that's the case, then you shouldn't host the World Cup. If the World Cup has been kind of given to India to host, then you know what are the repercussions or who are the teams that are going to come and play. And if you have a problem with a particular team or a couple of teams, then you should immediately say that, look, we're not interested. And then some other host country is found. But to accept it and then, I think reach a situation which we are discussing now, I think that it goes neither side. What do you do now? Now that you have decided to be the host, what do? Are you going to call off the match now? Are you going to say that we will not host Pakistan when the match is the day after tomorrow? Is that what's going to happen? I mean, I don't know what... Look, at the end of the day, I agree with you, and I agree with Sushant, that sports and politics will somewhere or the other get intertwined. It's from time immemorial it's happened. So that's not the issue. The issue is that knowing all the ramifications, the political ramifications that are likely to take place, that's the call you have to take.
No, but all this band, dhol, baja, shor, sharaba, is that what, hospitality or what?
I mean, look, whether you want band or dhol, baja or not, that's for the organizers to decide, isn't it? I mean, if you ask me personally, I may not be interested in it at all. Maybe it's a spectacle that you need to create. I believe that there's going to be a huge,
Yep. Opening ceremony, almost like an opening ceremony kind of a thing before the match. Yeah.
So, I mean, these things, IPL can be had without cheerleaders and music and all that. That can be dispensed with. It has nothing to do with cricket. So that's not the argument. The argument really is what you are saying, what your premise is, that should we be having an event with this team here or these teams here? I think that is a fundamental question, whether you have...
So, Sushant, isn't that a fair question to ask? I mean, this tournament began a week, 10 days ago. There was no opening ceremony, there was no shor sharaba, tamasha, all of that. And just before the Pakistan game, there's going to be almost like an opening ceremony of sorts. I mean, there's going to be Bollywood actors and there's going to be Nach Gana and all of that. Because it's commerce, right? It's money. Everybody knows that this is the one game that's going to derive the maximum profits for the boards, for the broadcasters, for everyone involved.
Zaka, every Indian match will get money for the boards and the broadcasters, right? Because of the Indian market. Even if India plays Zimbabwe, it will get the eyeballs first and foremost. Secondly, I don't have any disagreement with Ayaz when he says that, look, either you don't hold the tournament, but if you are holding the tournament, then you have to invite Pakistan, and which is why I, right at the outset, said we'll hold our nose and invite them. If we have to play with them in this tournament, we'll do that. We will ensure that their security is taken care of. All of that is all given. The bone I'm picking with the BCCI and all the lowlives who head that organization. Do you need to do the kind of tamashas which you are doing right now? You want to create a big splash, do all the jing bang, everything. I have no problems with it if you do it in the opening ceremony. Why are you not doing it with your match with Australia? Is Australia a lesser team? Is England a lesser team? Is Afghanistan a lesser team? Afghanistan are a damn good team, right? Do it with them.
There's a very obvious reason, Sushant. Sushant, there's a very obvious reason. The reason is the eyeballs and the money that this match will generate, no other match will generate. It's a fact.
But look, the eyeballs would have been generated even during the opening this thing. You could have had India in the opening match, right? And you could have had an opening ceremony with India in the opening match. It would probably go against the old traditions. But then, where is cricket traditional anymore? Even, the World Cup is hardly traditional anymore, right?
Yeah.
So you can change all of that. My basic bone is that we show no self-respect, we show no restraint, and the BCCI, I don't know, I've always said this. Every time I mention BCCI, I want to slip into Punjabi and I can't do it in your channel.
Thank you for that, and thank God our channel is in English, not in Punjabi. But Ayaz, I come back to that point. At the end of the day, it's about commerce, isn't it? Nothing explains why in the Asia Cup, a large part of that tournament got wiped out because of the rain. Only the India-Pakistan game had a reserve day. Why? Because the broadcasters are putting pressure on you, because the boards are putting pressure on you, the fans are putting pressure on you, because that's where all the money is generated. No other game had a reserve day except the India-Pakistan game. So let's then drop this pretense, right? Let's just say, ये पैसा है, ये धंधा है.
The money is or the commercial aspect is an outcome of a tournament, whether it's the Asia Cup or the World Cup. Yes, and if it doesn't make financial sense, you won't have these tournaments at all. But that's not the point. I think the issue really is what Sushant has raised and what you have raised is why are we kind of almost, it seems that we are genuflecting against in front of the Pakistan team by inviting them and having a reception committee, so to speak, in hotels and all. And I think that one has to look at it in two ways. One is that if you want to host the tournament, then you have to invite all the teams that are eligible to come, who have qualified to come. You can't say I will invite. You can't be selective there. If West Indies have not qualified, you can't say no, but now I want to still invite them. That's not possible. The other is once you have invited them, I think the BCCI in this aspect at least is trying to play the host, and I don't see that as a reason for saying ab ye kyun ho raha hai? Maybe they did it in Chennai also with the Australian team. We don't know. Maybe
so playing a good host and to be fair, Atiti Devo Bhava, right? We had the G20, we had folks from 20 different countries coming, Sushant. We had people like Trudeau coming, but we extended the same welcome to everyone. So maybe the Australian team is also being cheered like this. Who knows? We haven't seen those pictures. But Sushant, the point is that this is how we treat our guests. Now, the worst thing would be to call them here because of whatever compulsions we have, hosting the tournament, etc., and then be bad hosts. Sushant.
No, I'm certainly not saying that be bad hosts. I'm just saying that can you show some self-respect and some degree of restraint when you are doing this. You don't do it with the Australians. You don't do it with many of the other teams. Maximum you would hand over is a bouquet or something. If you're do the same treatment to these guys. You don't have to go overboard. And this is what my bone is with these guys. Have you absolutely no sense of decency on how you are going to, or no sense of responsibility on how you are going to deal with people? I'm not saying that, when the Pakistani team enters, you throw eggs at them. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that can you show, some, I just keep saying self-respect because I think that is something which clearly is missing.
Okay, Ayaz, I'll give you the final word. Now, I'm given to understand that Pakistani journalists who want to cover the match have suddenly been told in the last couple of days, get your passports in, you're going to be given visas, right? For all practical purposes, diplomatic ties are pretty much in the back burner. We don't even have full-fledged embassies in each other's countries. There are no full-fledged ambassadors in each other's countries. The number of visas that have been given have been really, really whittled down. And which is fine. I am with that sentiment and with that measure, because unless Pakistan addresses this question of terrorism, you shouldn't behave like this is a normal relationship. But suddenly the World Cup comes around and 60 Pakistani journalists have been told, get your passports in, we'll give you a visa. I mean, that's convenient. That's double standards at worst.
Zaka, a couple of things. One is that this World Cup hasn't suddenly come across. It's not been the development over the last few days or a few weeks. It's been in the pipeline for a couple of years at least, ever since India was allotted the World Cup. And at that point in time, in the qualifying round itself, it became known that Pakistan is one of the teams that will qualify, will be in the World Cup. And there's been, toing and froing. Yes, there's been talk whether they should come, we should come. They said they will not come, we will come. That has been going on. As far as what Sushant has been talking about, I think he's being a little reactive. He's talking and highlighting things that, images that have been seen on television about the Pakistan team being received in Ahmedabad or Hyderabad or wherever they are, and not about what Australian team, the reception they may have received in Chennai or South Africa received in Lucknow, because that does not change. The reception protocol for all teams has not changed because there is a particular team or there is not a particular team. I think that is looking at it in a very, partisan way.
No, but what about the crowds chanting "Jeetega Bhai Pakistan"? I mean, I don't think any other crowd for any other team has said that in the stadium.
Have they? I have not been to the stadium. I am going to Ahmedabad first thing tomorrow, so I'll have to wait and see what happens there.
Right.
And I'm covering it for the same channel, so we'll have to wait and see.
Zaka, can I make a small point?
Very quickly, Sushant, I got to wrap up.
Yeah. So look, here is the other problem. We've decided that we'll give, I don't know how many visas we've decided to give to the Pakistani journalists. Who has vetted these guys? And we are the same country. We had such good relations with the old Afghan regime. There were a number of our friends who were desperate for visas for this country, and this same government refused visas to some of those people who were not going to come and settle in India. They were just going to use India as a transit to somewhere else, right? We refused to give a single Afghan a visa. And here we are, because, the son of the Home Minister is involved in this whole cricket jamboree. What we decide is that we will give the Pakistanis visas because we want to be nice guys. Okay. I cannot understand what this policy is all about.
All right, we'll leave it at that. I just hope one thing happens, that, once the 22 cricketers take to the field in Ahmedabad, the focus will be on the cricket and not on the surround sound around it. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to our guests, and thank you very much if you've been tuned in. That's a wrap. I'll catch you again tomorrow night, same time.
Welcome to Vantage Israel Edition. It's day 6 of the war, Israel versus Hamas. The mood remains tense, sometimes even volatile. Last evening was a bit scary for us. Our phones started buzzing, alerts were popping up continuously, sirens went off in several places. There were reports of infiltration from the north, of Hezbollah breaching the northern border of Israel. It all turned out to be a false alarm. And now we understand that fake news abounds in conflict situations. But when false alarms ring from official sources, then it can lead to a lot of chaos. Thankfully, things look a lot better today, at least in Tel Aviv here. Can't say the same for Gaza. They are being pounded, and it will get worse with the ground offensive. Tonight, we bring you updates on the war and the politics. Israel has announced a unity government. We look at what they're up to. West Asian nations are trying to mediate. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is talking to Iran and Turkey, but can they broker peace? America's top diplomat Antony Blinken is in Israel. What is the game plan of the United States? India has started evacuation efforts. They've launched Operation Ajay to bring back Indian citizens. But beyond that, what is New Delhi doing? And who is the Hamas mastermind who planned what's being called the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust? We'll bring you his story. Let's get started.
هاي الاسعاف جاي.
مستمعينا الكرام في أجواء قطاع غزة في حالة استعداد.
It's day 6 of the Israel-Hamas war, 144 hours and counting. The death toll continues to rise in Israel because more bodies are being recovered from sites that came under attack on Saturday, and in Gaza because it is coming under waves of aerial strikes by Israeli forces. So more than 1,300 dead in Israel and more than 1,400 in Gaza. Unless there's a miracle, this time tomorrow we'll be reporting a higher death toll.